colonialism and Puritanism not only politically became married together, but I think they socially they performed very similar functions of neutralizing the Islamic intellectual heritage. And you have to ask, like, why were the British colonial power, why was it so supportive of the Wahhabis, right? And why did they back them up so vigorously? And especially in the book, The Great Theft, is where I talk about this at length. And then after that, the American form of colonial policy, imperialism, and until today, why this sort of very symbiotic relationship between the two? And I think it's because they perform very similar functions. They both don't have a space in their worldview for Islamic culture or theology, or the Islamic civilization itself. There's no place for it. They don't understand it. They don't want to understand it. They don't see a place for it. They don't want a place for it. It would just be much easier if it would just go away. And that's just a reality that you're confronted with.
Is it how then the kind of let's say Puritanists and Wahhabi claim the authority, then the most let's say the most authoritativeness in Islam? I mean, is it based on the political conditions, just the support of the British government, or it is because the stagnation of Islamic thought? I like to say the vacuum of authority. Is it because of that the problem, or is it because of this political condition, like the support or something like that?
Well, I mean, I think it is all, for instance, if we imagine hypothetically that Islamic huge institutions of awqaf, all these private religious endowments that used to fund schools and used to fund so many public works and so many. I mean, one of the things is that even the first private endowments to take care of animals, for instance, or take care of travelers, was in the Islamic civilization. Now, one of the things that colonialism does is that when it comes, it finds this religious endowments very troubling, because they have an independent will of their own, and it's a wedding of interests. Colonialism works with local rulers who are also served by destroying the public role of these religious institutions or these endowments. So not only are these rulers, like, take the most famous of them, Muhammad Ali in Egypt, or Ataturk in Turkey, not only do they confiscate the properties of all these endowments and make the role of religion in the public space entirely dependent on the state, on government funding, and by this controlling, but they also have the backing of the colonizing powers in doing so. We don't have a single incident where the colonizer, whether British, Dutch, French, it doesn't matter, has clashed with the ruler about a ruler's decision to abolish the religious endowments. In fact, we have from Egypt and from Algeria and from Syria, we know that in times when rulers have felt that destroying the religious endowments would lead to possible social unrest, or that the clergy would lead revolts against them, there were pressure applied by the French colonial powers or the British colonial powers in Egypt to actually have the ruler move against the religious endowments. Okay, so this in itself is going to, as we know, it's going to create an authority vacuum, because then as the religious leaders become funded by the state, they're increasingly seen as just agents of the state's peons and have no independence and then that in itself leads to a deconstruction of the tradition, because these were the people who represented the tradition. And so now, how would it have been what would have happened if there was never a Muhammad Ali in Egypt who destroyed the role of Azhar, for instance? What would have happened if there was never been an Ataturk who destroyed the Khilafah and destroyed the religious endowments in Turkey and ruled Turkey with an iron hand and very dictatorial, but very anti-religious? But then religiosity, if it's no longer in the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottoman Empire does not exist, who became the carriers of religiosity? Who became those who represented Islamicity? Well, at the time, the options were either Egypt, for instance, but Egypt did not step to it because it was under occupation by colonial powers. So all alternatives were neutralized by colonialism. Or the one place where there were not official occupation, although de facto occupation, was Saudi Arabia, or what is today Saudi Arabia. And that was not, and there, this was very puritanical and allied with the non-believers, the British, against the heretics, the Shia, and the Ottomans, who they saw as heretics. So in other words, typical Puritan fashion, what they consider a bad Muslim is always worse than a non-Muslim, or a heretic is always worse than, and the British is, it's well documented that the British quite openly worked to have the Wahhabis take complete power in Arabia. And then after that, it was the Americans. And to this day, I mean, think of the way that the extent of protection that the Wahhabi establishment and royals have in Saudi Arabia or all the Gulf countries. It is, I mean, if there is ever any threat to any of these monarchies, it is nearly a sure thing that there would be military intervention by the United States. Now, you would say, well, how, why, if this is also clear, how does this not delegitimate Wahhabism if at the same time there's such dissatisfaction with the legacy of colonialism and imperialism and so on? And here it's where the role of religious affectations, I think, is quite prominent, because Wahhabis, while they can perfectly lead double lives in everything, I mean, they can have an outer appearance that says, we hate the West, we hate America, we hate Europe, we hate this, but at the same time, never challenge on the ground the political hegemony of you know. So it is as if, by definition, all that matters is that externally you are, and that's why they also they emphasize quite heavily, for instance, the notion that a Muslim must look different and speak different, right? The worst thing in the world is that a Muslim in appearance would be indistinguishable from a non-Muslim. Well, for what reason? I mean, for what meaning? Say it's just this is what dignity for a Muslim means, right? And you say, okay, so how about a common, if there are common morals, like for instance, justice against injustice, or mercy against lack of mercy, or they say, oh, all of that is irrelevant. The important thing is that you display religiosity in a superficially distinctive and antagonistic fashion, in fact.
But that means that there is no clear distinction between public and private matters.
I don't think there is at all. I think it's sort of the relegation of it is one of the things that experts in law know is that law comes in law normally. In order for a legal system to work, for law to work, law must only intervene in exceptional situations. When the law intervenes, it means that society, culture has failed. So law comes in at the time when there is a breakdown and resolves a conflict. But if a system is working well, you don't need the intervention of law because society itself, through cultural or social mechanisms, is functioning. If the minute you go to court, it's supposed to be, when you go to court, it's supposed to be the exception, not the rule. Imagine if we tried to run society by people running to court every time they want to do anything, right? You'd say it's a society that doesn't function. The whole point of law is it is a referee when normal processes of society break down. Now, and that in Islamic law, you say, well, there are two big distinctions, right? Ibadat and mu'amalat, matters of worship and matters of public law. And ibadat, matters of worship, they say it's between you and God. The law the legal system doesn't intervene. The legal system takes care of mu'amalat, social interactions. And you say, okay, what is the goal of Sharia, of Islamic law and social interactions? And it will say, and the response is, تحقيق مصالح العباد. In other words, to achieve welfare of people by resolving conflicts. So the whole notion of mu'amalat is to resolving conflicts and directing people towards what is good. But the law itself, it is not what you cannot. The law doesn't invent good and then command it and order it. The law comes in to enforce when normal mechanisms of compliance with society fail. So people, for some reason, have a breakdown. And so that's when you go to court, or the legal system comes in, or you need a policeman because the normal dynamics of society have broken down because someone doesn't want to play by the rules. if we existed in perfect harmony, if we existed in, as Muslims say, jurists used to say that if people existed in a perfect state of harmony, would they ever need public law? And they say, theoretically, no. The reason we need mu'amalat, the reason we need public law, is because utopia is not possible. If it was possible, then this law would have nothing to do. It would just be redundant. It would completely not have no function. Now, this distinction between mu'amalat and ibadat, between public law and ritual matters or worship or laws that regulate worship, it is at the heart of the very notion of Sharia. I mean, everyone that grows up studying Sharia knows this distinction. But yet, in Wahhabi theology, in puritanical theology, that distinction is not only not respected, it is obliterated. It is completely nullified, because when it comes to public law, and here same thing as mixing or lapsing the executive function, judicial function, and legislative function. They say, well, when it comes to mu'amalat, when it comes to public law, this is a matter of siyasa shar'iyya. This is a matter of political decisions of the ruler, right? And so then what does law do? They say, pay attention to rituals and worship. So suddenly the law, instead of imposing a rule of law, instead of being a constraint, if you look in books of Islamic Sharia, they say the reason the law exists is to restrain al-mulk, to the government. The purpose of law is to restrain government, because not to restrain people, to restrain government. But in the Wahhabi paradigm, law empowers the government and only restrains people.
So for the sake of government?
For the sake of government. I mean, they say, well, the government is supposed to serve God and the people, and it should regulate people in order to serve God. Okay, so who makes sure the government is serving God by any measure? Well, this is and here again very pronounced. Well, this is a matter of you have to obey those in power, and accept whatever they say as a presumed good, as long as they are maintaining the rituals, as long as they have, and this is the whole book of rebellion and violence, which, I mean, Saudi Arabia has spent a great deal of money to make sure that for 10 years now it's been attempts at translating it to Arabic by various scholars, and they don't want, because in that book I investigate the whole Islamic tradition and what it has to say about this notion of you leave the public law to the ruler, and you accept the ruler as God's destiny, and as long as the ruler maintains rituals, then there's nothing to do anymore. And I investigate whether this is mainstream Islamic theology or not. And of course, not a surprise that it's completely contrary to mainstream Islamic theology.
It's not mainstream.
It's not at all. I mean, proof is in the book is this. As one reviewer said, that the book cites about 500 original sources from and the book is fortified with citations. Every page you'll find citations that fill half the page. Why? Because I knew that Muslims have been bombarded by the Wahhabi propaganda, so much so that they cannot imagine that anything else exists in their tradition but that. And so they assume that, well, but at the same time, if you come to a Muslim and say, is Sharia supposed to be a rule of law? Intuitively, they'll say yes. And say, is Sharia supposed to restrain the ruler? And intuitively, they'll say yes. And then you say, but how is this then consistent with what the Wahhabis say, that you just accept the ruler as God's destiny and you don't intervene in any public matters, and as long as, how is that consistent? And then they're sort of stuck, because the ideas don't jive together, they don't fit together. And that's when people start suspecting there must be something we've missed, something that's missing from this picture, something we haven't been told about, or something that has been hidden or suppressed, and so on. And that's when, frankly, all the situations where I've had people in, a lot of my works are like a very popular underground nature in the Gulf or in Saudi Arabia. The reason is that people say, oh, okay, so what is this missing link? And because it addresses something that they've always felt uncomfortable with, something that is innately troubling, because it just doesn't make sense. How could it be that the whole notion of Islam is you achieve your autonomy, your freedom, in accepting God as the supreme and rejecting all else, but at the same time, this is consistent with the puritanical theology of effectively blind obedience to the government. Now, the thing that I've, the resistance is that their Puritanism is it's sort of an evolution of Puritanism, as the Puritanism of Bin Laden and the sort of people who've both. There is a Puritanism that is only concerned with the internal enemy, the heretical Muslim, the bad Muslim. This is the Puritanism of Saudi Arabia. It's a Puritanism that is invading all over the Muslim world and so on. And then there's a Puritanism that is premised on the same ideas, except for the idea that, well, we obey the ruler blindly if first the ruler makes a commitment to Islamic government, and the existence and accepting non-Muslims as allies is contrary to the principles of Islamic government. That's sort of the militant puritanical addition. But even the militant puritanical addition tapped into traditions of non-blind obedience to government. So it's not that they completely invented something from tenure. They've gone back, took the traditions that says that if the government is not acting in a correct fashion, you may defy the government. They've co-opted these traditions, but instead of these traditions being government, defy the government when the government is not acting justly, or the government is not respecting the freedoms of people, or the government is not merciful, or the government, whatever. They've limited the notion of good governance to whether the government is allied with, first their concern was whether the government is anti-communism or not, and then it became whether the government is pro-Western or not. But in all cases, Islam remains, the Islamic tradition, intellectual tradition itself, remains irrelevant. Islam is always like a reaction to various, but there is no substantive inquiry into what is the kind of humanistic contribution of this civilization. In what ways did it form our understanding of humanism? And I think that is where you have the biggest loss. This is where Muslims sort of stepped out of the march of civilization. Because civilization is going to progress, is going to go on with them or without them. And either they sort of remain alienated from their tradition and jump on whatever others are producing and then sort of cling here, cling there, cling that. In other words, they sort of like as if there's a train and they just jump on the train from the outside, or they re-engage their tradition and make it relevant to human history again. And but relevance, there's a huge difference. When the Quran, for instance, tells a prophet that to call for Islam, it is consistently a dynamic or a charismatic call for discursive engagement, to engage them in discourse. جادلهم بالتي هي أحسن, and debate with them. And the Quran itself is a text of discourse. It's a text that's constantly saying, they say this, and it responds. And then it says, a lot of what we know about what the critics of Muhammad said, we know because the Quran preserved it. If it hadn't, we wouldn't know what the critics of Muhammad were saying. And the Quran preserved it in response of responding to it. A militant challenge is not a contribution. And it's just, it's like the Mongol invasions. It was a militant challenge, but it had no substance beyond it except this code of law, Ilyasa. And of course, it became absorbed by a superior culture, and in that case, it was Islamic culture. And like Saudi Arabia itself, Saudi Arabia is a place remarkably impoverished of culture, except in areas where the Shiites dominate. In other words, where actually the Wahhabis are the weakest. But Saudi Arabia, other than the culture of Western consumerism, there is no culture in Saudi Arabia. I mean, you go to Saudi Arabia, what do you find? Malls and McDonald's, Burger King, all the consumerism. But is there a native culture that is allowed to grow and exist? Of course, it was swept away because Puritanism and its insistence on superficial ritualistic practice abandons all substance. And when you abandon all substance, you're left with and this is, we'll actually pick up with this tomorrow, is that you're left with the least intelligent elements of society.
Yeah.
Because those who are satisfied by just imitation in existence their consciousness, they have no, their consciousness, they have no creativity, or they suppress their creativity. They're not ambitious, or they suppress their ambition. They are not driven towards ideas and towards invention and towards khalq, towards creating, right? They are quite satisfied with just blind imitation. That's all their eyes can see. But this is the bottom of the barrel. So you end up with the worst in society, in control of your society, in possession of society, governing society, controlling society. And what happens then to those higher in the barrel? What happens to the intelligent people, creative people, to the imaginative people? They go, they leave. They go and live in the West, they become anti-Islamic, they rebel against Islamic tradition, they become secularists, they become Muslim self-haters, etc., etc. Okay, so, yeah, I'll go ahead. Yeah.
Compare with the Western society, is there any idea comparable with the notion of forbidding wrong and commanding right, just culturally? Like you just quoted the Thomas
the whole, I mean, this actually, I'll talk about this more tomorrow, because the whole notion of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil of Thomas Aquinas, this in the West sparked the whole domain of natural law, which sparked the whole domain of human rights. Now, remarkably, Muslims had already gone a long way in saying, in distinguishing between rights, saying that there are huququllah, the rights of God, and the huquq al-abad, the rights of human beings. And they had already reached the notion of rights, and even, as I'll explain tomorrow, even reached the notion of natural law. But again, with the, sort of the entry of the militaristic Ottoman civilization, very militaristic and despotic, and the rise of colonialism, all of that intellectual tradition was forgotten. It's like going into ancient ruins and rediscovering ancient. I often feel like as if I myself and my teachers and so on are like from a time machine, as if in a time machine where what people see as ancient ruins that they cannot understand, these actually were the homes that we lived in, that constituted our intellectual universe and our spiritual universe. And they became dry, arid, and abandoned primarily. Well, there are two forces: Wahhabis, frankly, and colonialism. And what, you know, there's, until you deal with the puritanical reality, I don't know if you can deal with the other reality, the colonial and imperialist reality, which basically responds to interest. Just, you know, whether you have enough autonomy of information and technology and inventiveness and creativeness to make you worthwhile to respect or not. You know, it only responds to material interests.
Last one. Can I, about in addition to talking about what happened in the text for this, can we say, because so in Nisa we can say that there is condemnation of like blind taqlid.
Right.
Can we say what's happening when Wahhabis just like the same like that? Like a
and the whole notion of imitation and versus, you know, whether they, you know, let's do this. Remind me tomorrow to start with this, because this notion of imitation, taqlid versus ijtihad, innovation, is very important. Because if you bring a Wahhabi here and you say you advocate imitation, blind imitation, I'll say no. I advocate ijtihad. I advocate innovation, and then they say, but Okay, so wait a minute. How could that be when all you do is really imitate? And that is what will answer tomorrow, because there is a theological, again, clash, a tension that falls apart, and again, one of those things where you see a crack that tells you that the reality is not consistent and it's not solid. All right, tomorrow.
Good.
All right.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Sir, can I have your autograph? This one.
You know,
It's always
I want to.
good to have.
Where's that? Can you write down some spelling names?
Okay. Yes.
Personally. You have any? You have an extra pen?
Hilman Latif.
Hilman Latif.
You may write them in Arabic.
That's it.
Okay, I'm not going to stay behind.
Taqleed.
Yeah, a critical notion, isn't it?
Is that all confusing?
We are, but we are.
16.
I'll just put 609, right? I got the right year. Right?
Yeah, 16.
In
Thank you. Shukran.
Muhammad Asad, so your name is like the famous scholar, the late
Asad.
Muhammad Asad.
Muhammad
Yeah,
Asad.
from India.
No, Muhammad Asad was a British convert.
Oh,
And he wrote, and then he died now.
He's a good scholar.
But he wrote the Road to Mecca, and he wrote probably the best translation of the Quran
Yeah.
in English.
Oh yeah, I know that. I know that. The translation. Hopefully,
So I got from you and from Professor Sabra also. Princeton, I guess.
Princeton.
Yeah, the Princeton is.
You know Ahmed Karam Mustafa?
The name sounds very familiar, but I don't know. I can't place it. Why? Who's he?
Thank you.
Professor Islamic Studies in.
Can you read my name? Spelled like this.
Maria.
Yeah. But you can also say Maria.
Maria.
Every Catholic
Maria.
girl.
Maria. Maria.
Yeah, but every Catholic girl
sounds
in
like French.
Maria. No, it's I don't know.
Maria.
It's a form of Maria.
Maria.
My mother's name is Maria.
Oh no. French.
If you're born in a Catholic family as a girl, your name is always Maria.
Maria.
Somewhere.
Okay.
In the
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Wait, who's this fellow again? You were saying
Ahmed Karam Mustafa.
Ahmed Karam Mustafa.
University of Washington.
University of Washington.
Yeah, he graduated from
Yeah, it's in your.
from McGill, and he wrote God's Unruly Name. God's Unruly. What's his book?
Oh, God's unruly friends, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't read the book, but I've actually heard. Okay, that's why the name is familiar. It was a study of dervishes or something like that. I didn't know that he's at the University of Washington now. University of Washington, Seattle?
No, Washington University.
Oh, Washington University.
But
Okay.
in not in Seattle, nearby.
Where is it? I think in
Uh,
DC.
San Luis.
San Louis. Okay. Yeah. Did you study with him? Or did you just know him?
No, I was studying with his friend.